The sun was still fighting its way through the soft, purple-pink veil of the morning sky when Ella set out with her 2 dogs. A scruffy, golden mutt named Buddy and a sleek black German shepherd called Max. They trotted down the familiar dirt path that wound through the sleepy little neighborhood, her sneakers slapping the pavement in rhythm with Buddy's excited bark. Max walked a little behind, steady and calm as he always did. He was the protector, the one who never left her side. To an outsider, it was the perfect picture of a peaceful morning. A little girl, a couple of dogs, and the stillness of dawn. But if you looked closely, really looked, you'd see something darker in her eyes. Something more than just the quietness of a child lost in thought. You'd see the tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze darted nervously at every passing car, the stiffness of her small hands gripping the leash. No one ever saw the secret Ella was carrying, a secret that twisted deep inside her chest every time she took a step. A secret so heavy it weighed her down with each breath. Every morning she was running from the life she couldn't escape, and hiding a truth so unbelievable, even she had trouble believing it sometimes. But this morning was different. Today the world was going to see. Every day felt the same street, the same dogs, the same heavy air. Ella was used to it by now. For as long as she could remember, walking Buddy and Max was the only part of her day that felt normal, that felt real. The world around her was a blur of whispers and hurried glances, but here, with the sound of paws padding softly on the ground, she felt alive, if only for a moment. She wasn't thinking about the bruises hidden under her sleeves or the quiet fear that lingered in her heart whenever her mother called her inside. She wasn't thinking about how her father's voice sometimes boomed in the next room, so loud and sharp it shook the walls of their little house. Here, there was only the rhythm of her breathing and the steady pull of the leashes in her hands. And the dogs. Buddy, always looking for trouble, darting ahead in playful spurts, and Max, protective, watching her like he always had. She needed this quiet, this peace. She needed to believe, even if it was just for a few minutes, that she was safe. But all that was about to change. As they reached the old oak tree by the path, something unusual happened. A man on a bicycle slowed down as he passed by, and then stopped. He looked at Ella and then at the dogs, smiling in a way that didn't feel entirely kind. Ella tensed, her heart pounding as he spoke. "Nice dogs," he said, his voice too friendly. "They look like they're more than just pets, huh?" Ella's throat tightened. She forced a smile, tightening her grip on the leashes. But she knew deep down that this stranger wasn't asking just to pass the time. He was asking because he could sense it too. There was something about her. Something he couldn't place, but that unnerved him. Ella didn't answer, and with a quick tug of the leash, she moved forward, her footsteps growing faster. Behind her, Buddy and Max followed, their paws silent on the ground, unaware of the storm that was brewing. The days passed in a blur after that encounter. Ella could still feel the man's eyes on her, his words echoing in her head. They looked like they're more than just pets. And the thing was, he wasn't wrong. Buddy and Max weren't just dogs to her. They were her lifeline. They were the only ones who knew the full truth of what went on behind closed doors. The truth that Ella would never speak aloud. It started slowly. Small things that made her mother's smile a little too wide, her hands a little too quick to clap when her father returned home. But over time, the noise in the house grew. Arguments that started as whispers grew louder, breaking the silence of the house. And Ella learned to hide in plain sight. She learned how to walk with her dogs, how to act like everything was okay. No one ever questioned it, not until now. That afternoon, as Ella passed the same oak tree, she found herself face to face with the same man on the bicycle. But this time, something was different. His eyes weren't friendly anymore. They were sharp, calculating. He asked again about the dogs, and this time, she couldn't look away. She didn't need to say anything for him to see it. The truth was written all over her face. She wanted to run. She wanted to grab Buddy and Max and run until the world couldn't find her. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there frozen, as the man watched her, the wheels turning in his mind. "Why do they look at you like that?" he asked, his voice lowering, almost a whisper now. Like they're protecting you. The words hit her like a slap. The following days were filled with fear. Ella couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Her dogs stayed close by her side, their presence a constant comfort. But the world was closing in. The man on the bicycle had started watching her more, showing up at the park during her walks, always lurking at the edge of her vision. His questions were getting sharper, more insistent. He knew. He could feel it too. Ella didn't know how much longer she could keep hiding it, but she had to. She had to protect her family, her life. She had to protect her dogs. But as the pressure built, the cracks in her carefully constructed world began to show. One afternoon, as she sat on a bench in the park with Buddy and Max, the man finally confronted her. "You don't have to keep running," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You can tell me. I can help you." Ella's heart skipped a beat. Help? Who could help her now? I'm fine," she said quickly, but the words felt like lies in her mouth. Her hands trembled as she held the leashes tighter. Max growled low in his throat, a sound she had never heard from him before, and then in a moment of desperate honesty she broke. "I'm not fine," she whispered. "My father, he hurts us. He hurts me and my mom, and I don't know how to stop it." The tears came suddenly, pouring down her cheeks, and for the first time in years, Ella let herself cry. She cried for the little girl who had never known safety, for the woman who had tried to protect her family in silence, for the dogs who had known the pain and terror without ever being told. The man's face softened, and without another word, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Within moments, a woman arrived, a police officer, kind but firm. She knelt beside Ella, holding her hand and listening as Ella told her everything. The next few days felt like a dream. Ella didn't know if she was asleep or awake as the authorities moved swiftly, taking her mother away from her father's grasp and placing Ella in the care of a relative. The house that once felt like a prison was now empty, silent, and for the first time in years, Ella could breathe without fear. Buddy and Max stayed with her through it all. Their unwavering loyalty never wavered. They were her rock, her quiet protectors. They didn't need words to understand. They simply stayed by her side, licking her tears away when they fell, their eyes never leaving her. But while she had escaped the darkness at home, Ella knew she wasn't free. Not yet. She had to learn to live again, to trust again, to believe in the world outside. The journey was far from over. But it was a start. It wasn't until months later that Ella truly felt like she could breathe again. She was in a new home now, a bright, airy place with walls that didn't feel like they were closing in. The dogs were happy too, playing in the backyard, their tails wagging like they had finally found peace. But every now and then, Ella would look at Buddy and Max and remember. She would remember the fear, the pain, the silence. And then, she would remember the courage it took to finally speak, to finally let someone in. With every step she took into her new life, Ella knew she would never be the same. The girl who had walked her dogs every morning, hiding her pain behind a smile, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had found her voice. And with Buddy and Max at her side, she knew she could face whatever the future held. The journey had just begun. It was the small moments that Ella began to notice first. The way the air smelled different in the new house, clean and open, without the sour tang of fear that had clung to her old home. The sunlight filtered through the windows in soft beams, filling the space with warmth and light. There were no more screams echoing through the walls, no more cold silences at the dinner table. Ella could breathe again, deeply, without that ever-present weight pressing down on her chest. Buddy and Max had adapted too. Their playful barks filling the new house, their bodies wagging with a freedom they hadn't known in the cramped space they'd shared before. Ella had never realized how much their energy affected her, how much their quiet presence had kept her tethered to the broken pieces of her past. But now, in this fresh new place, they were free, just as she was. It was hard, though, in ways Ella hadn't expected. There were days when she felt completely adrift, the familiar weight of the past pressing against her like a constant reminder. Some nights, when the house was quiet, she could still hear the sounds of that old home, the shouting, the thudding of fists against walls. The memory of her father's rage was like a shadow that never fully left her, no matter how bright the sun shone. But the new life she had now, the one that had been handed to her with a second chance, was something she held onto with both hands. She had to. She had to remind herself that this wasn't just about escaping, it was about finding something worth living for. As the days passed, Ella began to visit her mother more. The woman who had once been so lost, so broken, was slowly finding her strength again, too. Her mother had been through her own version of a quiet rescue, and though her wounds were still fresh, she was learning how to heal. She was learning to smile again, to laugh at silly things, to appreciate the warmth of the sun. And slowly, with each passing day, Ella saw her mother become the woman she had always wanted to be, strong, loving, free. But Ella didn't yet know what that would look like for her. The thought of returning to school made her stomach twist with anxiety. Would the other kids ask questions? Would they see through her calm exterior and ask about the bruises she'd hidden? Would they know the things she'd lived through? She wasn't sure she was ready to answer. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch watching Buddy and Max chase each other in the yard, a knock came at the door. It was the officer from that day, the one who had helped her when she'd finally broken and told the truth. Her name was Sarah. "I just wanted to check in," Sarah said, her smile warm and familiar. "How are you doing, Ella?" The words felt heavy on Ella's tongue, but she smiled anyway. "I'm okay," she said, though it was more a question than a statement. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she needed someone to ask. Sarah sat down beside her, watching the dogs with a quiet fondness. "You know, sometimes the hardest part of this whole process is just figuring out how to be okay again," she said, her voice soft. "It's like you've been through a storm, and it's only once it passes that you realize how much damage there is to repair, and sometimes you have to let others help you rebuild. It's not about forgetting. It's about moving forward." Ella's throat tightened at Sarah's words. She had always tried to be strong, to handle everything on her own. But maybe she didn't have to anymore. Maybe there were people out there who wanted to help her, people who wouldn't look at her with pity or judgment, but with understanding. Maybe, just maybe, she could let them in. The first time Ella returned to school, her hands shook as she gripped the straps of her backpack, the weight of it grounding her. It felt like everyone was looking at her, even though they weren't. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, each footstep feeling like it echoed louder than the last. She wasn't sure what she was afraid of, but she could feel the anxiety knotting her stomach. But then, as she walked into her homeroom, something changed. The usual hum of chatter, the rustle of papers, the smell of new books and pencils. It didn't feel so suffocating. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ella let herself breathe. Maybe it was the thought of Buddy and Max waiting for her at home, or the steady support of her mother, but something about this moment felt right, like she was exactly where she needed to be. One of her classmates, a girl she had always found too perfect, too put together, looked up from her desk and smiled. "Hey, Ella, right?" She gave a small wave. "I think I saw you at the park with those dogs of yours. They're really cute." Ella's heart skipped. It wasn't the conversation she had expected, but it was exactly the one she needed. She smiled back, something soft and shy but genuine, and nodded. "Yeah, Buddy and Max," she said, the names rolling off her tongue like a new, easier truth. It wasn't perfect, she wasn't perfect. But in this moment, in this space, Ella knew she was on her way to becoming someone new. As the days passed, Ella found herself becoming more comfortable at school, though the anxiety still lingered in the back of her mind. But with Buddy and Max by her side, with her mother's strength slowly building, she started to let herself hope. Hope that maybe one day she would be able to smile without it feeling like a mask. Hope that maybe one day she would look back and see a path that wasn't defined by the past, but by the future she was choosing to create. And through it all, the dogs were there. Quiet, steady, watching, always present. They were her family, her protectors. They had been there when she had no one else. They were the ones who had never given up on her. It was the beginning of something new. And that, more than anything, was worth holding on to. The weeks blurred together, but in the quiet moments, Ella began to notice the little things that had once been lost beneath the weight of her past. The way Max would rest his head on her lap whenever she sat on the couch, his eyes soft and trusting, as if telling her that nothing bad could happen when he was near. Or how Buddy, ever the mischief maker, would sneak into her room at night, curling up at the foot of her bed, his presence a comforting reminder that she was never truly alone. Ella's connection with the dogs had always been deep, but now it was something more. It was a bond forged in silence, in shared moments of quiet understanding. She didn't need to explain the things she felt. They understood her without a word. The dogs had been there for her during the darkest of times, and now they were helping her piece together the fragments of a life that had been torn apart. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting a golden glow across the yard, Ella sat with Max and Buddy on the porch. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and pine, and the world felt still, as if holding its breath. It was moments like these that Ella treasured most, when the noise of the world faded and she could simply be, breathing in the peace around her. But there was still something she hadn't fully let go of, something that lingered in the back of her mind, like a shadow that couldn't be erased. The guilt. The guilt of having left her father behind, of leaving that life behind. She knew it was the right thing to do, knew it was the only way she could survive, but that didn't mean it was easy. Max seemed to sense her inner turmoil, as he often did. He nudged his nose against her hand, his gaze unwavering, and for a moment, Ella felt the weight of her guilt lift. She wasn't responsible for the things that had happened. She hadn't caused the hurt, the anger, the chaos. She was a child. She was allowed to be free of the burden of those choices. But freedom didn't come without its cost. Ella's new life was far from perfect. There were still nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every detail of the life she had escaped. There were days when the echoes of her father's rage felt too close, too real. The past had a way of creeping back, a relentless shadow that clung to her despite the brightness of her new home. But with each passing day, Ella grew stronger. She allowed herself to feel the things she had buried for so long. The anger, the sadness, the confusion. She didn't try to push them away anymore. Instead, she gave herself the grace to feel them, to let them run their course. And in doing so, she began to heal. She started to see the world through a different lens. No longer did she view herself as a victim of her circumstances, trapped in a life she didn't choose. She began to understand that she had the power to shape her own destiny, that her story wasn't defined by the darkness of her past, but by the strength she had found in herself. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with Max and Buddy, Ella realized that she no longer feared the future. She had spent so long living in fear, worrying about what might happen, that she had forgotten how to hope. But now, for the first time in years, she could see the possibility in front of her. It was like standing at the edge of a new chapter, a blank page waiting to be filled. The dogs lay beside her, their quiet presence grounding her as she smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Months passed, and Ella's world continued to shift. Her mother found a new job, one that gave her a sense of purpose and independence she hadn't felt in years. Together they began to rebuild not just their home, but their lives. They were no longer victims of their circumstances. They were survivors. Ella started to thrive at school, her teachers praising her for her intelligence and resilience. She made new friends, people who saw her for who she was. Not the broken girl with a hidden past, but the bright, determined girl she was becoming. And through it all, Buddy and Max remained her constant. They were her family, her rock, the ones who had never wavered in their love and loyalty. Ella didn't need words to know how much they cared for her. It was in the way Max would nudge her hand when she felt down, or how Buddy would leap into her lap when she needed comfort. They were always there, always present, reminding her that no matter how hard things got, she was never alone. But the true test of her strength came one evening, when her mother sat her down, a serious look on her face. "Ella, I think it's time we talked about your father," she said gently. Ella's heart clenched. She had avoided this conversation for so long, but deep down she knew it was something that had to be addressed. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about understanding that the past no longer had a hold on her. With Buddy and Max by her side, Ella listened as her mother spoke about the journey they had both been on. The pain, the suffering, the decisions they had made. And in that moment, Ella understood. She understood that healing wasn't just about escaping the past. It was about learning from it and finding the strength to move forward. As her mother spoke, Ella felt something shift within her, a sense of closure, of peace. The pain wasn't gone, but it no longer defined her. She was free. Free to live, free to love. Free to build a future of her own choosing. And as the days stretched into months, Ella knew that no matter what came next, she would face it with the strength she had found within herself. And with Buddy and Max by her side, her unwavering companions, her protectors, her family, a future was waiting, and for the first time, Ella was ready to embrace it. Even as the days grew brighter, the shadows of Ella's past never fully disappeared. They lingered, just beyond the edges of her consciousness, like distant thunder on the horizon. There were moments when she would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. The dreams had started again, fractured memories of her father, the harshness of his voice, the weight of his anger. But now, when she awoke, it wasn't the same overwhelming fear. She wasn't trapped anymore. She had Buddy and Max and her mother, all of them standing as pillars around her, offering protection, strength, and warmth. Still, the echoes of her past were not easily silenced, and for a time, Ella thought they never would be. Each time she remembered the dark corners of her old home, the harsh reality of her father's presence, she would close her eyes and breathe deeply. The dogs would always be there, Max with his calm, steady gaze, and Buddy, ever the playful distraction, nudging her hand to remind her she wasn't alone. One afternoon, as Ella sat at the kitchen table scribbling into her journal, her mother came in, a cup of tea in hand. There was a softness in her expression, something new, a tenderness that had been missing before. "How are you feeling today, sweetie?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. Ella paused, her pen hovering over the page. She thought about it for a moment. The weight of the past was still there, but the present was beginning to feel more solid, more grounded. She smiled softly, a slow, tentative smile. "I'm okay," she said, her voice steady. I think I'm finally starting to let go." Her mother nodded, sitting across from her, her gaze filled with something Ella hadn't seen before. Pride, understanding, and hope. "It takes time, honey. But you're stronger than you know." The conversation lingered, soft and unhurried, as they talked about the future. Ella's mother was planning to take some online courses to rebuild her career in a way that suited her new life. They discussed how they would redecorate the house, how Ella would be starting high school soon. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and quiet excitement. In that moment, Ella realized that, although the past would always be a part of her, it no longer had the power to control her. The darkness of her old life had not broken her. It had only shaped her into someone stronger, someone more capable of facing the world head-on. She could look forward now, without fear, without regret. As the seasons changed, so did Ella. She was no longer the quiet, withdrawn girl she had once been. Her steps were steadier, her smile more genuine, her eyes full of a new kind of fire. She began to trust herself, to allow herself to dream again. And as she walked through the world, Buddy and Max always at her side, she felt the weight of their unwavering loyalty. A reminder that she was never truly alone. The days grew longer, the sun warmer, as Ella entered high school, her first year marked by fresh beginnings. Her new friends, unaware of the history she carried with her, saw only the confident, intelligent girl who was beginning to find her voice in the world. She was no longer the girl hiding behind the mask of normalcy. She was her own person, no longer defined by the scars of her past. Buddy and Max, too, had found their place in this new chapter. They were a constant presence in her life, always there to greet her after a long day, their eyes filled with love and understanding. No matter how much the world had changed, their love had remained the same, pure, steadfast, and unwavering. And yet, there were still moments when Ella would feel the sting of her past, when the memories would surface, raw and unbidden. The nights when her father's voice would echo in her mind, or when the absence of her old life would feel too much to bear. But she learned to embrace those moments too. She no longer ran from them, nor did she try to bury them. She allowed herself to feel the pain, the loss, but without letting it drown her. For the first time in a long time, Ella realized she was no longer fighting to survive. She was living, fully. It wasn't until one winter evening, when the air was crisp and the ground was covered in a thin layer of frost, that Ella received a call she hadn't expected. Her father was in prison now, serving his time for the things he had done. But that wasn't why the call came. It was her mother who had answered it first, her voice trembling with something Ella couldn't place. She had stayed on the phone longer than Ella had expected, and when she hung up, there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. "Your father," her mother said, her voice strained. "He wants to apologize. He says he's sorry for everything." Ella's heart skipped. She hadn't thought about him in months, not really. She hadn't wanted to. The very idea of hearing his voice again, of hearing him beg for forgiveness, felt like a slap. "I don't know if I can do that," Ella whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Her mother sighed, the weight of years hanging between them. "I know. But maybe, in time, we can find a way to let go of the anger. Maybe, one day, we can find peace." Ella closed her eyes, the weight of the past pressing down on her once more. She thought about everything she had been through, the darkness, the pain, the uncertainty. And then she thought about the journey she had taken, the strength she had found within herself, the love that surrounded her now. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Ella said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But maybe one day I'll be able to forgive him. Maybe one day I'll be strong enough to let go." And for the first time in years, Ella felt something shift inside her, a quiet sense of acceptance. The past would never fully leave her. It would always be a part of her, but it didn't define her. She was her own person now, and that was enough. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks into months, as Ella continued to grow, to thrive, to heal. She took it all in stride, the good, the bad, the beautiful mess of it all. She faced her fears head-on, knowing that each day was another step toward the life she was building for herself. And Buddy and Max, they were always there, by her side. Their presence constant, their love a reminder that no matter what happened, she would never be alone. Ella knew she had a long way to go. She wasn't perfect, and the journey wasn't over. But she was no longer the broken girl who had once walked in the shadows. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. The future, with all its uncertainty, held endless possibilities, and Ella was finally ready to embrace it, to walk forward, with Buddy and Max by her side, into the light. She was no longer running. She had finally found home. As the years passed, Ella's life began to unfold in ways she had never imagined. The darkness of her past, once a constant shadow, slowly faded into the background, no longer holding sway over her every step. Her relationship with her mother grew stronger with each passing day. They laughed together, shared stories, and built new memories, free from the suffocating grip of fear and pain. Ella had learned to embrace life's imperfections, to find beauty in the mess, and to cherish the small, quiet moments that once seemed insignificant. She no longer carried the weight of guilt or fear, but instead wore resilience like a quiet armor, one forged by the dogs who had never left her side. Buddy and Max, the steadfast companions who had stood by her through every storm, were more than just pets. They were the family she had chosen, the ones who had helped her survive and heal. And while the road ahead would still have its challenges, Ella no longer faced it with trepidation. She had learned that healing wasn't linear, and it wasn't about erasing the past, but about growing from it. She was no longer that scared little girl who hid behind her dogs, afraid of the world and everything in it. She had become something more, a young woman strong and free, with a heart full of hope and a future full of possibilities. As she stood one evening, watching Buddy and Max play in the yard, she realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And that, above all else, was a victory.